Welcome to Lesson 2.4, Chemical Reactions and Enzymes. In this lesson, we'll explain how chemical reactions affect chemical bonds. We'll describe how energy changes affect how easily a chemical reaction will occur. And we'll explain why enzymes are important to living things. Here's an example of a chemical reaction that occurs in our bodies. Now first, a chemical reaction. It's a change. It changes one set of chemicals into another. So we're dealing with two sets of chemicals. We've got some terms to describe those: reactants and products. Reactants are the chemicals that are combining or being broken apart into other chemicals called products. In this example, carbon dioxide is released from tissues into the bloodstream where it reacts with water to form carbonic acid. Now that carbonic acid is transferred to the lung tissue where the opposite occurs. That acid is broken down, so it's the reactant in this case, and it is broken down into the products of carbon dioxide and water. It's a very important cycle. We'll learn more about it later, but this is how your body gets rid of carbon dioxide. But that is a chemical reaction. Now, chemical reactions take energy to occur. Now, some chemical reactions release energy. Those that release energy, those reactions can occur on their own as certain amounts of energy are absorbed. Now, that term is called spontaneously. Don't confuse that with instantaneously. Spontaneous means you do it on your own. So, an example is diamonds in wedding rings. Those are made from graphite that's been compressed with lots of pressure. Those diamonds over time naturally decompose back into graphite without any help. Now it takes millions of years, so you don't have to worry about buying a ring and it turning to black powder on you. Now, chemical reactions that absorb energy, it requires a source of energy to get those reactions going. So we have two pictures here. You have this energy absorbing reaction. Now you see you start off with reactants, and then as you build the products, you have a higher amount of energy at the end. So there's a higher amount of energy, so energy has been absorbed. When you look at the energy releasing reaction, when the reactants gain enough energy to form products, you have less energy at the end. So energy is released. So which one of these would be a reaction that would be an example of you eating food for energy? That would be the energy releasing reaction. Which reaction occurs spontaneous? Once again, that's the energy releasing reaction. Now, the energy that's required to get a reaction going is called the activation energy. That's the energy that's required to get a reaction starting. So both have an activation energy. Sometimes these energy releasing reactions, they can get it from the environment. They can just slowly absorb it. Energy absorbing reactions usually need a higher amount of energy. Let's review energy and reactions. So you have two examples here of a chemical reaction, the blue line and the red line. Now you notice that they start off with this much energy when they have reactants, and then after the chemical reaction, the products, you have this much energy. So would you say that's energy releasing or energy absorbing? It's energy releasing because you have less energy in the products than you had in the reactant, so energy is released. So would you consider this spontaneous? It can occur spontaneously because it's energy releasing. Which one of these two require more energy to get started? It would be the blue line, because you can see the line here goes up, requiring more activation energy. Which has a lower activation energy? That would be the red line, because the energy level is lower where it starts changing from reactants into products. Which one will proceed more quickly? Once again, it's the red, because it has lower energy requirements. It can proceed quicker. All right, let's take a look at enzymes. Now, some chemical reactions that occur in our bodies would occur too slow for them to be useful to us. So we need help to speed up chemical reactions. One way you can speed up a chemical reaction is by lowering the amount of energy that's needed to start up a chemical reaction. That's what enzymes do. Enzymes are a type of protein that help speed up chemical reactions by lowering the activation energy. So we have two examples here. We have an activation without an enzyme, and we have an activation with an enzyme. You notice if the enzyme is around, it lowers the activation energy, so it can occur quicker. So let's take a look at how that works. But first, here's an example. In the previous example of a chemical reaction, we were showing carbon dioxide and water combining to form carbonic acid. Well, there is an enzyme in our blood called carbonic anhydrase, which speeds up this chemical reaction by a factor of 10 million. So it happens 10 million times faster than it would normally happen if the enzyme wasn't around. So let's take a look at how enzymes work. Now this diagram looks a little complicated to start with, but let's take a look at how the enzyme, right here, carbonic anhydrase, how it works. What happens is that it will combine, it will provide a location, a place for your substrates. That's the things that are going to combine together to form your product. It provides a location for them to connect with each other and form your product. So the enzyme provides a location for these chemical reactions to occur. So what that does is it lowers the activation energy. And that site where that occurs, that's called the active site. The active site of an enzyme and a substrate, they have complementary shapes. Now a good analogy for that, the substrate and the enzyme having complementary shapes, is like a lock and a key. So the enzyme would be the lock, and the substrate would be a key, and it fits into the lock in a certain way. We're going to learn more about this later when we study metabolism and homeostasis. Now, this is a very important concept, so I want you to draw this in your notes. I want you to draw this and label what's going on, and make sure you use the terms substrate, product, active site. Make sure you understand what those are.